Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a really striking source. It's titled Arab Leaders' Betrayal of Palestine.
Yeah, it certainly makes you stop and think right from the title.
It does. So what's the kind of main point it's trying to get across right away?
Well, it kicks off by highlighting what it terms the deafening silence from many Arab leaders regarding ongoing Israeli actions.
Deafening silence.
Exactly. And for this source, that silence, it's not just neutrality, it's framed quite strongly as abandonment.
Wow, abandonment. That's a heavy charge.
It is. And the source argues this isn't just about, inaction being passive. It sees inaction itself as a very clear political statement.
Okay. And what context does it give for this silence? What actions is it pointing to?
It lists quite a few things: relentless military operations, illegal settlements, the siege on Gaza, and what it calls repeated violations of international law. That's the backdrop.
Right. So how does the source justify using such a strong word like abandonment? What's the argument built on?
Well, it starts with history. It reminds us that for, well, decades really, Arab leaders publicly claimed to champion the Palestinian cause.
That was sort of a cornerstone issue, wasn't it, for Arab identity unity?
Precisely. That's the baseline the source establishes, but then it argues there's been a really significant shift away from that, a troubling one in its view.
Okay, so it's tracing a change over time. It's not just a snapshot of today.
Yeah.
What does it say has actually changed?
It points to things like realpolitik, that focus on practical national interests, maybe above ideology, and economic deals, normalization agreements. It mentions the Abraham Accords specifically.
The ones establishing ties with Israel.
Yes. The source argues these things have simply taken precedence over justice, human rights, and regional dignity. It suggests, I think, that these long-held principles can sometimes take a backseat to national strategy.
So those accords, the source sees them as real evidence of this shift.
Concrete examples, yeah. It argues they've exposed a new reality.
And what motivation does the source assign to the leaders making these deals or staying silent?
It puts it pretty bluntly. It claims these leaders are more interested in courting global powers and preserving their regimes than in standing up for a people facing occupation and apartheid.
So it's really questioning their priorities, contrasting stated ideals with perceived actions.
Exactly. It raises that tension between maybe self-interest and regional solidarity.
And what does the source say are the consequences of this, the effects of this perceived inaction?
It makes a really serious claim that these leaders have not only betrayed Palestinians, but also their own people.
Their own people. How so?
Because, the source points out, many citizens within these Arab nations still passionately support the Palestinian cause. So it highlights this gap, this disconnect between the leadership's stance and maybe public feeling.
Right, so it's not just a foreign policy critique. It suggests a domestic impact, too.
Absolutely. And that leads into what the source sees as perhaps an even bigger issue. Moving beyond just political calculation, the source frames it as a moral failure.
A moral failure,
Oh.
okay. Does it suggest what should have been done instead?
It does. It doesn't just criticize the silence, it points to options it feels were ignored. Things like coordinated diplomatic pressure, maybe suspending normalization, or actively supporting international legal avenues. Concrete actions.
So putting it all together, the source is really drawing this sharp contrast, isn't it?
Definitely. Between the historical talk, the rhetoric about championing the cause, and what it describes as the current reality of inaction.
A big gap.
A very big gap. And it ends with a pretty stark warning for you, the listener, to think about.
What's the final thought?
It says quite directly that history will remember who stood by in silence while Gaza burned and the occupation deepened. And it adds that history is rarely kind to those who traded justice for convenience. It's really a statement about legacy and accountability.
Powerful words. So considering everything this source puts forward really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does this suggest about how alliances are changing today and maybe what the real cost of political convenience looks like when a crisis hits? Definitely some food for thought there.